They called me a dozen names that morning, but none of them were mine. Just noise over the auctioneer's patter and the crows laughing on the rail. And then that giant in a dust-black coat cut through the crowd like a boulder rolling down a creek, laid silver on the block without blinking, and said in a voice that didn't ask permission, "She's coming with me. You know what I mean?" Yeah, that happened. And the coat slid across my shoulders, still warm from his back, while the whole of Copper Ridge forgot how to breathe. Let me back up a sec. 3 days earlier, a coach went belly up in a cut bank and left me barefoot, my dress shredded, my satchel clutched to my ribs like a second heart. And by the time I limped into town, the man who ran the auctions, Zeke Trammell, soft hands, expensive hat, eyes like a snake in shade, had already decided what I was worth. Folks smirking because smirking is cheap, and then the giant arrived. He was 6'8" if he was an inch, sandy hair, a face carved by weather but cut with kindness, and the kind of quiet that makes loud men careful. He said his name was Jonah Ledger, and he put that coat on me without looking at anything but my eyes, not my skin, not the tatters, not the spectacle, and it felt like the first respectful thing anyone had done for me since Missouri. We walked off the block together while Zeke counted coins that weren't going to fix his real problem, and Jonah led me to a saloon with painted windows and a sign that said Harrow House, where Clara Harrow, the owner with gray at her temples and steel behind her smile, took one look at me, locked the door. A schoolteacher with chalk on her fingers and kids who believed I knew everything. And my father, born enslaved, freed as a boy, turned himself into a legal scholar by candlelight and stubbornness. Used to say knowledge is the only thing they can't auction away. So even in that saloon with my stomach empty and my dignity worse, I kept hearing him. Page after page he made me memorize when I was 12, property law like a hymn, federal jurisdiction like a map out of a bad county. And when a little girl in a patched dress, Ellie Hart, 8 if that, bright as flint, slid a slate toward me and asked if her letters were right, something in me woke up. I straightened her spacing, shaped her J like a proper hook, and the way her eyes went wide was the first sunrise I'd seen in weeks. Word runs fast in a place like Copper Ridge, faster than fear. Clara poured coffee and took notes with a precision that didn't belong to whiskey work. Her questions were surgical: dates, docket numbers, who stamped what, and when. Morning hit hard the way it does when men who think they own the town decide to remind you. The doors blew open like a set piece, and in walked Zeke with Sheriff Bullard and 2 badge-heavy deputies arranged to look legal. And Zeke pointed at me as if I were his business and rattled off charges: vagrancy, receiving stolen property, impersonating a decent woman, while the sheriff clanked his cuffs for the room to hear. And you could feel their pleasure, the kind that feeds on witnesses. I stepped out from behind the counter, that coat still on my shoulders, my satchel at my side, and I said, not loud, just level, "On what authority, Mr. Trammell, will you trespass federal statute to seize a citizen without probable cause?" And the look he gave me was the first time I saw him actually think. Let me back up another inch. My satchel, worn leather, 2 buckles, survived that coach wreck because I wrapped it in my body when the world flipped and kept it tied through 3 days of walking. Inside were my father's letters of standing, my own teaching certificates, affidavits from a judge who owed him more than a favor, and copies of deeds families thought gone. I laid those documents out on the oak like a dealer ready to end a game. Zeke moved to speak, to sneer, to swat the proof like a fly, but I kept going, citing chapter and section the way my father taught me. Territorial code on seizure, federal supremacy where due process is a joke, notice requirements that Zeke had treated like a dare. And you could feel the air change, the crowd outside pressing to the windows. Ellie with her slate hugged to her chest spelling a word she'd learned the night before: justice. Sheriff Bullard never liked to be the slowest learner in a room, so he reached for his pistol out of habit more than plan, and that's when Jonah moved. Not fast, just final, opening his coat to the star I hadn't seen yet, bright and plain as truth: United States Marshal. "This saloon," he said calm as a river, "is part of an ongoing federal investigation into land fraud, and this woman is material to it." And just like that, the sheriff's hand forgot its job, while Zeke's face turned the color of old milk. And Clara, God bless that woman, walked to the back bar, opened a locked cabinet, and pulled a folder tied in ribbon with more documentation than Zeke had ever imagined a saloon would keep. And I swear to you, 3 people who shouldn't have met were suddenly in formation, law, story, and memory. You could say that was the peak. Me reciting statutes with my father's ghost steadying my breath. Jonah holding the room with federal calm. The letters marched straight as fence posts. JUSTICE. And the room went quiet enough to hear the dust settling on the street outside. We didn't need gun smoke to win. We needed paper. We needed witnesses. We needed someone to remember what the law is supposed to do. And by afternoon, Jonah had Zeke and the sheriff under federal hold, while telegrams sang out of the office to the Capitol, and Clara's notes turned into affidavits stamped by a circuit judge with a spine. And neighbors came with more proof, like floodwater, like a town remembering it had a voice. 3 days later, more marshals rode in, warrants folded in their breast pockets, seals red as sunrise. And the big house on the hill where Zeke liked to pretend he was gentry wore government ribbons on its doors. The auction hall where he'd sold other people's lives got rekeyed. Whitfield, weeping because quiet people always do when loud men fall, walked up and picked their lives off the shelf like books returning to their rightful place. Satisfying. It was a feast. And the town square, where I'd stood in a stranger's coat, held a very different kind of gathering as deeds were corrected and mistakes discovered and signatures suddenly found. Ellie's grandmother pressed a paper to her heart, as if you could absorb ink through skin. And I stood on Clara's porch watching the same sun that burned me on that block warm a town that wasn't scared anymore. I won't lie, there was money in my satchel too, not coins, possibility. We learned my father had been granted acreage for years of legal service he never bragged about, a tract bigger than pride and deeper than rumor, with mineral rights that sounded like fiction until you run your fingers across a seam of coal and smell the future. I could have sold it to a company that would bleed the hills dry and call it progress. I could have left, started fresh someplace that didn't know my humiliation by heart. But the thing about a teacher's mind is it counts what can grow, not just what can be spent. So we built a school, Ledger and Bonnet Academy. Though I made them put Ellie's slate on the wall in a frame so no one forgets how we got here. And when the bell rang opening day, children tumbled in with faces clean or dirty as fate. But he wears his sister's name inside his vest where the fabric is soft from being touched. Clara turned Harrow House into a newspaper, the Copper Ridge Tribune, because whiskey built the stories and ink carries them further, and every week she prints names that used to hide behind titles. And I make sure our students learn the difference between a signature you can trust and one you double-check. You want a last scene to stick in your teeth? Fine, hold this. Dusk on the Prairie. The schoolhouse windows throwing gold onto grass that bends and rises like a choir. Jonah leaning his shoulder against the doorframe listening to Ellie read. Clara on the steps with her notebook balanced on her knee, me chalk-dusted and happy in the way quiet work makes you. And down on Main Street, men in suits who once swaggered now walk like they've remembered gravity. And if the wind shifts, you can hear a train whistle promising the kind of tomorrow that doesn't come for free. We earned that shot of satisfaction. It's ours. Then a rider crests the far hill. Tired horse, long journey, telegram tucked in his hatband. He hands it to Jonah and looks at me because by now people know I'm in it whether I asked to be or not. And the paper says the network that fed Zeke is bigger than we thought. Judges in other towns, sheriffs who learned the wrong lessons. Auctions planned 2 territories over. And the question lands hard and simple. What do we do with power when we finally have some? Do we break people or build systems? Because I'm only one voice at a long table, and I promised my father I'd keep asking. What's justice and what's revenge? Where's the line between protecting your own and protecting everyone? And what would you have done if you were there on that block? Coat on your shoulders, crowd watching. Drop your take below. Who was right? Who was wrong? Where should mercy end and accountability begin? And what would make a town like ours truly fair? Because communities don't stay clean by accident. They stay clean when people argue it through and keep showing up.